Monsieur le Maire, distinguished panelists, hosts, colleagues and friends, bonjour. C'est un plaisir de vous retrouver ici, dans mon pays natal, que je ne vois pas aussi souvent que je le souhaiterais, mais qui m'interpelle fréquemment dans mon travail, car, et malgré peut-être les remarques que nous venons d'entendre, le Canada reste toujours un lieu de promesse et d'ouverture à la migration et à l'inclusion. Oui, je peux le dire parce que je travaille dans un contexte international qui est quand même de plus en plus effrayant. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you here at this International Metropolis Conference entitled The Promise of Migration, Inclusion, Economic Growth, and Global Cooperation. While my presentation touches on all three of these aspects, I will focus on the third, namely global cooperation. My remarks will center on the rising agency of cities in international diplomacy, specifically with respect to migration and refugee policy. In so doing, I will describe to you the work of the newly created initiative entitled the Mayor's Migration Council. Slide, please. The Mayor's Migration Council is a new initiative to help cities in their efforts to influence international discourse and priorities, and to create better outcomes for communities, migrants, and refugees. The MMC was launched in Marrakech last December on the sidelines of the adoption of the Global Compact on Migration, or the GCM. But the MMC's creation has followed years of work connecting cities and the global stage, with the annual convening of the Mayoral Forum on Migration and Development dating back to 2014, which has since been adjoined to the Global Forum on Migration and Development, or the GFMD. In addition to such global gatherings where cities have become more prominent in their presence and in their participation, cities are also gaining influence. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement on Climate, the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, the new Urban Agenda, all of these speak to the important role of cities in addressing global governance challenges. Most recently, cities have contributed in an instrumental fashion, both to the GCM and to the GCR, the Global Compact on Refugees, in ensuring that local priorities are reflected within them. And an untold story, which I will share with you today, since it was just mentioned by my colleague here, Debbie Douglas, is the fundamental role that cities play in ensuring non-discriminatory access to public services for all migrants. And there are references in the GCM under Objective 15 on public education and on public health, non-discriminatory access to public health, non-discriminatory access to public education. Those references are in there because of the advocacy work that cities did in ensuring that those norms found their way into that international agreement. So it is against this backdrop of the growing activism of cities and mayors on migration that the MMC was created, born out of a need to empower and enable cities with the knowledge, the connections, and the technical assistance to engage in migration diplomacy and policymaking on a regional and an international level. As we have seen with the so-called C40, or the network of cities committed to addressing climate change, the world's mayors can collaborate across geographies and party lines, they can share resources and knowledge, and they can collectively advocate for policy change on an international level. Indeed, with the support of the C40, cities are considered key implementing partners in the Paris Agreement. In a similar vein, the MMC seeks to strengthen the capacity of cities to engage internationally by providing them with the necessary knowledge and connections, by opening doors for cities to international policy discussions on migration and refugee protection, and by making city voices heard in these fora. It also supports cities' collective action and works to access resources such as funding and technical assistance for cities. A current example is the MMC's work in securing the role of cities in the follow-up and review process of the GCM, so that cities are recognized as key actors in the implementation of the compact. Ambassador Gomez Camacho of Mexico just a few moments ago spoke about the implementation now of the GCM, and you may have noticed that his first champions in the implementation of this international agreement, he stated mayors will implement the Global Compact on Migration. Why cities and why now? We've heard from a few of the panelists, and undoubtedly you've spoken about this over the last couple of days. Cities are appropriate and powerful partners in this work on migration and refugee issues because they are democratically elected, they are representative and held accountable, often on different time schedules than other levels of government. They are close on the ground, understanding and coming up with innovations to how to address some of the most pressing migrant and refugee challenges. They are often, or on the whole, not all, progressive and inclusive with respect to integration and inclusion. And many mayors in particular have positioned themselves in places of in positions of influence to advocate publicly, whether it's at the local, national, or even international level. Cities are implementers in carrying out welcoming and integration. As we know, cities are at the center of global mobility. To quote a fellow Canadian, Douglas Saunders, in his book, The Largest Migration in Human History, cities are where migrants, internal, international, and refugees are arriving. They are the front lines of welcoming refugees and migrants. They are increasingly engaged internationally. Mayor Valérie Plante of Montreal being one example, who delivered at the GCM conference last December the fruits of a declaration by cities known as the Marrakesh Cities Declaration, in which cities commit to implementing in unison, and I say that with emphasis, in unison, the obligations or the commitments rather of states in the GCM and in the GCR. And finally, the international system is signaling an opening to cities' involvement. Indeed, as cities mobilize, there are political opportunities at the international and at the interstate level that are opening up. As recently as a few weeks ago, an international group of cities advocated in a negotiation in the context of the General Assembly resolution on the follow-up and review of the GCM, negotiated for the place of cities successfully, I may add, tentatively successfully, for a key role, an important role, and a separate role from civil society as locally elected officials in their responsibilities and their commitment to implementing the GCM. Moreover, cities are in direct contact more frequently now with international organizations that provide relief and technical assistance, and more cities are also in discussions with international financial institutions for funding their development work. These political openings, matched with the rising agency of cities, has reinforced a need for the Mayor's Migration Council, which is working to ensure participation with a purpose for cities in interstate processes. But what I mean by purpose is that the end result is not the participation itself, but it is having cities unlock the resources that they require, material or otherwise, to start to achieve their objectives on the ground. An example here, you might imagine, for those of you who are not in Marrakesh, was the mayor of Kampala, Uganda, who at the 5th Mayoral Forum last December queried in a very public fashion the High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Filippo Grandi, on the need to match resources with accurate data on displacement figures in his city, encouraging a new generation of partnership between the city, this capital city of Kampala, and UNHCR. So what does the Mayor's Migration Council do? Its primary value add is to help cities navigate a complex landscape and the intricacies of the multilateral process, and to channel cities' advocacy and diplomacy efforts to secure both the representation and effective influence in international policy deliberations and decision-making in this field. It does so by providing technical assistance to city leadership to develop strategies and build coalitions at the request of cities. It does so by facilitating connections between cities and the multilateral system, as I just alluded to, and between cities, often leveraging existing intercity networks. It bridges and draws lessons across multilateral processes, highlighting and encouraging mainstreaming of migration and refugee concerns into other policy debates and agenda. It supports engagement of cities by assisting them in the development, dissemination, amplification of advocacy materials, such as public statements, editorials, and social media campaigns that help to support countering negative narratives about migration. And finally, it creates tools, commissioning new research and providing a repository of information and resources that can inform policy-making decisions and deliberations. Who is involved? The MMC's distinguishing feature is its ability to nimbly respond to cities' requests and to seek out and support cities' efforts to take on challenges and opportunities within the international system. It does so with a small team of experts who span the range of expertise of international diplomacy and city governance. It is supported by the government of Switzerland, the Open Society Foundations, and it is implemented in partnership with the C40. And fundamentally, the Mayor's Migration Council is guided by a strong founding group of extraordinary mayors from 11 cities from around the world who have personally committed to delivering on its mission. These are the mayors of Amman, Athens, Bristol, Freetown, Kampala, Los Angeles, Milan, Montreal, Quezon City, Sao Paulo, and Zurich. In closing, we are at the early stages of a groundswell where mayors' activism and cities' activism is on the rise. Cities are mobilizing and forging ahead on the most pressing challenges of our time, and migration being at the top, as we heard from the mayor of Gatineau. Cities' perspectives are invaluable in crafting international policy on migration in a way that reflects realities on the ground and that shapes norm setting of the future. Cities will no doubt continue to play a central role in moving progress forward on tackling migration challenges despite increasingly difficult national contexts, political, financial, and otherwise, which is the case in many of the places where they operate. The MMC, in partnership with cities and city networks around the world, will support efforts to engage up, to inform and influence national and international policy deliberations on migration. Indeed, it is worth emphasizing that the question of cities' inclusion in interstate policy deliberations has for the last decade really been about why they should be at the table. But today, it is no longer about why they are important, rather how cities can participate and be treated as full partners in migration governance. Thank you.